Did you know there's a strange phenomenon that causes people to randomly burst into flames and completely disintegrate? That's what we're going to talk about in today's video. So, this strange phenomenon that causes people to burst out into flames is called spontaneous human combustion. I remember hearing about this when I was maybe 10 years old. I was so fascinated and in awe about what this was and how this could be humanly possible. I even wrote a paper on it in grade 8 when we had to do like some public speaking assignment. Anyways, I remember a whole bunch of my classmates were so freaked out about what I was talking about and how that could even be possible. So I figured I would do a video on it. And I came across 3 really creepy stories that are just completely unexplainable and make no sense. And we're going to talk about those in just 1 second. So the first case we're going to talk about is one about a lady called Mary Reeser, and this happened in 1951 in St. Petersburg, Florida. So she was a lady approximately in her early 50s, and one night she had taken some sleeping tablets and was sitting in her chair in her living room, kind of falling asleep, dozing off, but she was also smoking a cigarette at the same time. So as you can guess, falling asleep while smoking is probably not the best idea. So what ended up happening is that she did fall asleep and the cigarette ended up lighting her nightgown on fire, which then led to the rest of her catching on fire. Now, what the FBI thinks happened after they investigated is that her body fat had acted as fuel, which is what led to her body being burned so badly she was barely recognizable. Now, as the years went on, a lot of skeptics looked into the case, a lot of writers, a lot of investigators, and they have come to the conclusion that the FBI's conclusion just didn't make sense. What was found at the scene from Mary that was left over was basically a piece of her skull, a foot, and a piece of her spine, in addition to some of the metal springs of the chair that she was sitting on. Now, for this to have happened would have meant that the fire would have had to have burned at a very, very, very high heat. This means that the surrounding area should have also caught on fire, not to mention the building in her apartment complex. At the scene, only the area where she was sitting and a few feet around her were actually burned. So this leads people to, kind of conclude that maybe this isn't actually what happened. As the investigation went on a little bit deeper, people were able to pinpoint that things that you would expect to catch on fire very easily, something that's super flammable, they had found an actual stack of newspapers near the area where she had been sitting that had not caught on fire. And it was also mentioned that there was no smell of smoke. So imagine walking into a house and you can easily tell if someone smokes or not. The smell of cigarette smoke is very, very distinct. So imagine the smell of an actual fire. There would be some sort of aroma left over, which there wasn't. So until this day, it remains one of the most confusing and unsolved mysteries when it comes to spontaneous human combustion. So case number 2 is a little bit more recent, and it happened to a man called Danny Van Zandt. He was a 65-year-old man, and he lived in Oklahoma. And it's important to note that he lived in a wooden house. So when his body was discovered, it was the same situation as the previous case, where only a certain area where he was laying is the part that ended up burning, which was weird to investigators because he did live in that wooden house. Neighbors had reported seeing smoke, and that's when they found only his body had been burning. Now, it's also reported that he was a heavy smoker, he was a heavy cigarette smoker, and he also liked to drink a lot. So the investigation tried to rationalize and pinpoint whether or not these 2 things would have been the cause for the fire, but they weren't able to determine an exact cause. So as I was doing research for this case, there wasn't much information about what was found of Danny, but it was quoted by the investigator that you could have poured gasoline on someone and lit it on fire and it wouldn't have burned as badly. So that kind of leads you to conclude that his body was left into ashes, if there was anything left at all. And just a little update on this case, I was doing some more research and I came across an article that talked about an alternative scenario. And it states that he actually died from a heart attack and he had fallen asleep and rolled over onto a cigarette, which then ended up causing him to burn. So that could be an explanation, but how does that explain the rest of the house not catching on fire? Anything super flammable that was around him, especially the wooden house? What do you guys think? So our third case takes us to Honolulu, Hawaii, and it's about a man called Yongse Kim. Now this story is a little bit more special because there's an actual witness to this case. So the story goes that Yongse Kim was living in Hawaii. He had lived there his entire life and he was a little bit older. He was 78 years old. He was also paralyzed from the waist down, so he was very dependent on a wheelchair to do everything to get around. So in December of 1956, Yongse Kim was at home by himself when all of a sudden he literally just burst into flames from his stomach area. So he's screaming and his neighbor ends up hearing the commotion going on. She can see smoke coming out. So she runs, her name was Virginia, and she runs over to his house. And as soon as she gets close enough, she says that the flames literally burst out and pushed her away. And the thing that she remembered the most was that these flames were actually blue. So if you know a thing or two about fire, you know that blue flames are actually much hotter than red flames. Blue flames actually burn at 2600 to 3000 degrees Fahrenheit. So this gives you an idea of how hot the flames were. So she tries to help him, but there was not much she could do because the flames were so big and so intense that she couldn't even get close to him. So she does what any other person would do and she calls 911. It took the fire department about 15 minutes to get to the scene, but by then all that was left of Yongse Kim was literally his feet. Everything else, including his wheelchair, had burnt down to ashes. Just like the other cases that we talked about earlier, the surrounding area where he was untouched. So it's like these flames literally just engulfed him, burned him and his wheelchair up, but nothing else surrounding him was touched. The fire department was very, very confused as to why papers and books and clothes in the vicinity, in the close area where he was, were completely untouched. So what do you guys think spontaneous human combustion is? Is it really just a case of unfortunate circumstances where someone accidentally lights himself on fire and then the fire fuel runs out within a matter of minutes, leaving the certain area burnt and everything else completely fine? Or is there a much deeper, stranger, paranormal explanation to all this? Let me know what you guys think in the comments below, and I'll see you in the next video.